Hello, true crime fans. Welcome to Debate the News True Crime live on Chatter Social. I'm Joseph Lobosco, joined by my amazing co-host Adrienne Barker. Tonight we're digging into the extraordinary case of Zacarias Moussaoui, a man often dubbed the 20th hijacker of 9/11, and notably the only person convicted in a U.S. court for involvement in the September 11th attacks. Some of the material we'll discuss, including terrorism, the 9/11 plot, and missed opportunities to present mass tragedy, is intensely disturbing, so listener discretion is strongly advised. If you or someone you know needs support, help may be available through the Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. Adrienne and I are not law enforcement, attorneys, or forensic experts. We do our best to research each case thoroughly, but this show is recorded live with little to no editing. Any factual inaccuracies are unintentional. Any suspects we mention who haven't been convicted of a crime are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The opinions of our guests and audience members are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of myself, Adrienne, or Debate the News.
So today is actually September 11th, 2025, so we're recording this. So tonight we're examining the saga of Zacarias Moussaoui, the only person ever tried in a U.S. courtroom for the 9/11 attacks. So we're going to unravel tonight how this French-born al-Qaeda operative underwent flight training in the United States. Yep, clean your ears. That's exactly what I said. Flight training in the United States. How FBI agents sounded alarm bells that went unheeded, and how after 9/11 he was indicted, pleaded guilty, and ultimately avoided the death penalty. So our goal is to stick to verified facts drawn from court records, the 9/11 Commission findings, official FBI and DOJ documents, and reputable news outlets. Zacarias Moussaoui, he was born in France in 1968 to parents of Moroccan origin. By the 1990s, he had fallen into the radar of terrorist recruiters. In 1998, he traveled to Afghanistan and attended an al-Qaeda training camp. He established direct connections with Osama bin Laden's network. And in fact, evidence later showed that he was personally selected by Osama bin Laden to participate in a future terrorist operation involving hijacked airplanes targeting U.S. buildings.
In early 2001, Moussaoui put the next phase of his mission into motion. On February 23, 2001, he arrived in the United States on a travel visa, entering in Chicago. He brought with him roughly $32,000 in cash, funds intended to pay for flight training. Moussaoui soon enrolled at the Airman Flight School in Norman, Oklahoma, to learn how to fly commercial airliners. However, his performance there was lackluster. He did not complete the course and quit the program by late May 2001. Instead of leaving the country when his authorization stay expired, Moussaoui remained in the U.S. unlawfully. In early August 2001, a significant sum of money arrived. Moussaoui received a wire transfer of $14,000 sent from Germany by Ramzi bin al-Shibh, a known associate of the 9/11 hijackers who was part of al-Qaeda's Hamburg cell. Days later, Moussaoui paid $6,300 in cash to enroll in advanced flight simulator training at the Pan Am International Flight Academy in Eagan, Minnesota. He specifically sought training on Boeing 747 jet simulators, despite having only rudimentary piloting experience.
It didn't take long for Moussaoui's behavior in Minnesota to set off alarm bells. In his 747 simulator classes, instructors noticed that Moussaoui had virtually no flying background and was uninterested in learning basic takeoff or landing procedures, which obviously struck them as bizarre. He was fixated only on controlling a plane in flight. He also insisted on paying thousands of dollars in cash up front for the training. So by August 15th of 2001, staff at the flight academy were so disturbed that they alerted the FBI's Minneapolis field office about this suspicious foreign student. And acting quickly, the FBI agents, in coordination with the INS, Immigration and Naturalization Services, they detained Moussaoui the very next day, which would have been August 16th. on an immigration violation, which we had mentioned he was overstaying his visa. Upon Moussaoui's arrest, agents already had grave misgivings about his intentions. He had been trying to learn to fly one of the world's largest jetliners without a good explanation, and some agents feared they might have caught someone in the midst of planning a hijacking attack.
Once Moussaoui was in custody, Minneapolis FBI agents urgently sought to investigate whether he was part of a broader terrorist plot. Field agent Harry Cement, who led the investigation, later testified that between August 16th and September 11th, he warned his FBI superiors, quote, more than 70 times that Moussaoui was a terrorist preparing to hijack a plane. Smeat and his team were desperate to search Moussaoui's belongings and laptop for evidence. On August 18, 2001, Smeat sent an alarming memo to FBI headquarters explicitly stating his belief that Moussaoui intended to seize control of an airplane for a terrorist attack. However, FBI headquarters and Justice Department officials repeatedly rejected the Minneapolis office's request to obtain a search warrant for Moussaoui's computer or to undertake a deeper investigation. Smeat's supervisors argued that there wasn't enough evidence connecting Moussaoui to a foreign terrorist group to meet legal thresholds, a conclusion Smeat vehemently disagreed with. Frustrated agents in Minneapolis felt they were being blocked at every turn.
In hindsight, there were multiple warning signs in the summer of 2001 that only look more glaring. Just weeks earlier, an FBI agent in Phoenix had warned about a pattern of Middle Eastern men taking aviation classes, a memo that went largely ignored. And as the agents scrambled for approval to dig into Moussaoui's ties, intelligence from overseas raised additional red flags. This info linked Moussaoui to a group affiliated with Osama bin Laden, bolstering the case that he was way more than just an aviation enthusiast. Yet, even that urgent French intelligence was watered down to the FBI's internal communication. When Minneapolis agents tried to use the French information to get a special FISA warrant, FBI headquarters officially removed references connecting Moussaoui to bin Laden, undermining the very foreign power linkage that might actually have justified a warrant. And the result? No search warrant was approved before September 11th. And tragically, on the morning of September 11th, 2001, Zacarias Moussaoui was sitting in a jail cell in Minnesota on immigration charges, and investigators still have not searched his laptop or luggage. After 19 al Qaeda hijackers struck New York and the Pentagon, Moussaoui's FBI interrogators immediately suspected that they had a terrorist in custody all along. And Moussaoui, for his part, lied to the agents even after 9/11, denying any knowledge of the plot. And he later admitted those were deliberate lies to allow his al Qaeda brothers to go forward with the attacks as planned.
With the country reeling from the September 11th attacks, authorities swiftly focused on Moussaoui as a possible co-conspirator. On December 11, 2001, exactly 3 months after 9/11, a federal grand jury in Alexandria, Virginia, indicted Zacarias Moussaoui on 6 felony conspiracy charges. The indictment was sweeping. It charged Moussaoui with conspiring with Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda to commit acts of terrorism transcending national boundaries, commit aircraft piracy, destroy aircraft, use weapons of mass destruction, murder U.S. employees, and destroy U.S. property, essentially paralleling the crimes of the 9/11 hijackers. Investigators had uncovered eerie parallels between Moussaoui's activities and those of the 19 hijackers. He had attended flight schools and simulator training, bought flight deck videos and aviation equipment, amassed knives and gear, and received wire transfers from the same al-Qaeda financing pipeline overseas. These similarities led the media to dub Moussaoui the presumed 20th hijacker, the operative who didn't make it onto the plane. In reality, another plotter, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, was intended to fill that role but couldn't get a U.S. visa. Al-Qaeda may have been positioning Moussaoui for a separate wave of suicide attacks later on, although that's unproven. Nonetheless, Moussaoui was now formally the first and only person charged in the United States in connection with 9/11.
The prosecution of Zacarias Moussaoui moved forward, but not without significant legal twists. Initially, Moussaoui professed his innocence and even sought to represent himself in court, causing multiple disruptions. He demanded access to high level al Qaeda detainees like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin al-Shibh to testify that he wasn't involved in the 9/11 plot, a request the government refused on national security grounds. These disputes over the classified evidence and witness access led to a tangle of pretrial rulings and delays. Judge Leonie Brinkema had to balance national security with Moussaoui's fair trial rights. And at one point, barring the death penalty until an appellate court intervened. In the midst of these complications, Moussaoui's own behavior was erratic, sometimes cooperative, sometimes belligerent. Then, in a startling turn of events, Moussaoui abruptly changed his plea to guilty in the spring of 2005. On April 22, 2005, he stood in open court and pleaded guilty to all 6 conspiracy counts in his indictment. And in a detailed 5-page statement of facts that he signed as part of the plea, Moussaoui made a chilling confession. He admitted training in Afghanistan with al Qaeda, meeting directly with Osama bin Laden, and volunteering to pilot a plane as part of a suicide mission. Moussaoui said bin Laden had personally tasked him to hijack a commercial jet and crash it into the White House if the United States refused to release a radical imprisoned for early terror offenses. He also admitted that after his August 2001 arrest, he lied to federal agents to conceal the 9/11 plot, hoping that attacks would proceed. An admission that the Attorney General, Alberto Gonzales, called a chilling confirmation of guilt.
With Moussaoui's guilt no longer in doubt, the case moved into the penalty phase in 2006, essentially a trial to determine whether he would be executed or spend his life in prison. Federal prosecutors argued vigorously for the death penalty. They contended that Moussaoui's lies and his conspiratorial role enabled the 9/11 attacks to happen, resulting in nearly 3,000 murdered innocent people. During the sentencing trial in Alexandria, the prosecution presented harrowing evidence: cockpit recordings, testimony from grieving families, and Moussaoui's own boastful statements, all to drive home the point that his actions contributed to the 9/11 carnage. Moussaoui, ever defiant, he often disrupted the courtroom with outbursts, laughing at the destruction wrought on 9/11, proclaiming, quote, "I am al-Qaeda," and taunting that he only wished more Americans had died. At one point, he yelled that executing him would make him a hero. His antics were so extreme that his own court-appointed defense attorneys suggested Moussaoui wanted to be put to death. In fact, his lawyer's strategy in this phase was to save his life by emphasizing how marginal and mentally unstable Moussaoui was. The defense called witnesses and presented evidence of his troubled upbringing in France, describing childhood abuse, neglect, and possible mental illness, in hopes that at least one juror would find mercy or doubt. They also highlighted that Moussaoui was in jail on 9/11 and had limited knowledge of the specific plot, claiming that the catastrophic scale of 9/11 would have been unchanged even if Moussaoui had told the truth in August. Essentially, they argued Moussaoui was a fanatic wannabe, but not a masterminding orchestrator. Importantly, the defense pointed out that government failures, the quote-unquote missed warnings, were a big part of why 9/11 wasn't stopped, not just Moussaoui's silence. After weeks of dramatic testimony and 7 days of jury deliberation, the jury reached a decision in late April 2006. They had to weigh the aggravating factors, like the massive loss of life and Moussaoui's intent to cause more deaths, against mitigating factors, like his mental state and peripheral role. In the end, the jurors could not unanimously agree that Moussaoui should be executed. At least one juror, in fact exactly one, according to later reports, remained unconvinced that Moussaoui deserved death, given that he was already in custody on 9/11 and had perhaps a minor role in the plot. Under the law, a death sentence in federal courts requires a unanimous jury. Because the panel was split, Moussaoui's life was spared, and his sentence of life imprisonment without parole became mandatory.
So now, on May 3rd, 2006, Judge Brinkema publicly announced the jury's verdict. Zacarias Moussaoui would spend the rest of his natural life behind bars with zero chance of release. And the next day, May 4th, 2006, Moussaoui, who at that time was 37 years old, returned to Judge Brigica's courtroom for formal sentencing. And it was a dramatic hearing. Many 9/11 victim relatives were in attendance, some sobbing in frustration that Moussaoui hadn't been condemned to death. And Judge Brinkema was unsparing in her final remarks to Moussaoui. You came here to die in a great big bang of glory, but instead you will die with a whimper. And by consigning him to decades of solitary confinement and obscurity, Brinkema said Moussaoui would never be able to achieve the glory and death he imagined. And Moussaoui, clad in a prison jumpsuit, responded with venom. And as he was led out of the courtroom in shackles, he clapped his hands and he shouted, America, you lost. I won. Before federal marshals pulled him away. It was a stark display of his lack of remorse. Even as he exited the spotlight, Moussaoui couldn't resist one last provocative outburst.
Today, Zacarias Moussaoui is locked away at the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, the infamous Supermax prison designed for the most dangerous criminals and terrorists. He's serving 6 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. In the years since his 2006 sentencing, Moussaoui has occasionally resurfaced in the legal system, attempting to withdraw his guilty plea and claiming he lied in court due to pressure. But those efforts have been swiftly rejected by the courts. He also offered to testify in lawsuits by 9/11 victims' families, making sensational allegations about foreign governments' involvement with al-Qaeda. However, Moussaoui's credibility is viewed with deep skepticism by virtually all parties. In an interesting postscript, Osama bin Laden himself weighed in on Moussaoui's case after the trial. In May 2006, bin Laden released an audio tape stating that Moussaoui, quote, had no connection at all with September 11th and was, quote, not number 20 in the hijacker group. Bin Laden claimed he had never assigned Moussaoui to the 9/11 operation, implying that Moussaoui's role in al-Qaeda was intended for something else. This message, if true, suggests that Moussaoui may have been earmarked for a different terror mission, one that never came to fruition because of his arrest. It's a chilling reminder of the other plots al-Qaeda had in mind. The Moussaoui case leaves us with many lingering questions about missed opportunities to prevent tragedy, about the limits of the justice system in terrorism cases, and about how we as a society should handle those who conspire to commit atrocities on such a scale.
Wow. Wow. This is some case. But can we go back on some of the stuff? First of all, in essence, wouldn't it have been a suicide mission anyways for him? He can't be that upset for being in jail. I mean, he was willing to be killed for his beliefs. I'm surprised he didn't ask for the death penalty. Could he have, Joseph?
I don't think you can actually request the death penalty. I think that has to really be in the hands of the jury. But you're right. He did seem to kind of backtrack in later years because when he was initially found guilty, he was just sociopathic in his way of responding, screaming, basically F America, I won, and praising Osama bin Laden, like just such a tone deaf way to end a trial like that. But in years past, he's tried to withdraw that guilty plea. So that to me says that he's not so much enjoying his life sentence in prison and maybe wants to get out.
That's what I was thinking. We had the same thought. Go ahead, Mariana.
Yes, I was gonna say the same thing, Joseph, and hello, everyone. I think that when someone is being in solitary confined with maximum security, no parole, nothing like that is your life. You are in there, it's probably very small. You are going to think twice and try to change the story. But how can you believe someone who conspired to kill so many people and actually confess to the crime? How can you go back and say, oh, yeah, never mind? That's actually not what I meant to say. This is actually the true story. So yeah, is the pressure of being incarcerated is making him come out with different stories. I believe that people who are, I would say the word push, I don't know, I guess to the point of wanting to hurt other people is because themselves are hurting, right? And so you want to do the same thing to others. Going back to his childhood and how he grew up, he was living in France, or that's where he was born, and he is very dark skinned. And so he was bullied every single day. He was bullied. So I feel he grew so much anger inside of him, and he felt like he didn't belong anywhere. He wanted to belong to something. He wanted to belong somewhere. And that is why he joined the al-Qaeda, this is terrorist group, because they welcomed him. They welcomed him. So he felt like he belonged to something and that he was willing to die for this cause. And he found an enemy, a common enemy.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is something we see not just in terrorism, this almost cultish type of like indoctrination. We see it across many different groups of people in different religions throughout different generations from past and present. And there is a common theme. It's a need to belong or be a part of something. And typically, you do have people who have some emotional or mental issues that have a bad background, lots of different factors, some of which are outside of their own control, that contribute to people falling prey to terrorist groups like Al Qaeda. So, hearing about his childhood and what he went through, that's horrible. But at the same time, a lot of people face a lot of adversity. There are a lot of different groups of people who are persecuted and bullied and treated like shit historically and still now. And 99.999% of those people do not go out and murder anyone and do not commit terrorist acts or enable terrorism. So unfortunately, he seems to be one of those people who fell into this. And it makes me sad, but at the same time, there's no excuse for those actions.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. So ZM was in custody before September 11th, and the FBI field agents begged headquarters to take this threat seriously. Do you think more aggressive action on Moussaoui in August of 2001 could have prevented the 9/11 attacks?
Absolutely, yes. I think that this is another case where the law is advised ahead of time and they say, oh, there's not enough evidence, let's wait. And then we wait until it's too late. And I feel like this happened here. What was there to wait? What was there to not be alert and say, "Hey, this is a threat to the country?" And they were planning, there was evidence that those people were training here to commit this attack.
So I agree with you, Mariana. There were serious flaws in the security oversight prior to 9/11. Things fell through the cracks in a spectacularly horrific way when it came to intel on these terrorist groups, and specifically Moussaoui. I think that if those red flags that many people within the organization were repeatedly throwing up had been taken seriously, who knows? We may have had a different outcome. It may not have stopped the attacks completely, but given that Moussaoui was connected to Al Qaeda and to bin Laden, it's very possible they could have gotten some information out of him. So, yes, while I'm glad the FBI and these organizations have acknowledged their mistakes and learned from them, in retrospect, yes, there was a huge oversight, and I think they could have prevented this potentially.
I guess when and looking at all this, I'm thinking to myself, boy, we really have come a long way because we've learned so much and so many of the changes that had taken place because of 9/11. Which, by the way, I would be remiss if I didn't say to you that uh, immediately after 9/11, my son was in the Army National Guard. And so he was called up, and that's when he did his 10 years in Afghanistan, which was awful for me. And what he was telling me, Al Qaeda, is horrific what was happening in Afghanistan, and how they hide in the mountains, and just all of that was really horrible. But the fact that they really just wanted to kill us. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that they should have taken it more seriously. It just feels like, why are these lessons always learned too late after the fact? Like, why can't we think of these things that could happen and then try to get a head start on it? So, how significant, Mariana, was Moussaoui's actual role in the 9/11 plot?
I mean, he came to this country to train to be a part of it, right? So he was willing to die. He was willing to fly a plane, also crash into the towers in New York. So his involvement was 100%, was 100%. He was all in, he was all in. The only reason why he didn't fly that plane and he didn't die in that is because he was caught before. And what happened.
Yeah, it's in retrospect, it's almost laughable that Osama bin Laden would release a statement saying that Moussaoui was not going to be involved in 9/11 because when you're going to a flight school with bundles of cash, wanting to learn how to fly a 747 but not to land it or to take off, it's pretty obvious what you're there to do when we look back at it within the context of all this. But when I think back, I wonder, was he maybe having second thoughts or was he just a dumbass? Because going into a flight training school when you're planning a terrorist attack involving flying an airplane, to not have this self awareness to realize that if you don't want to learn to take off or land, that's gonna set off alarm bells and is going to impede your ability to actually carry out this terrorist attack. That's what's confusing to me. So, did Osama bin Laden pull him back and not put him on the hijack for 9/11 because he was so dumb and he raised all those red flags?
I think one of the things that they missed in the training is the cultural awareness, like telling him, hey, you need to act like you actually want to learn, like teaching him how not to look so suspicious. Obviously, they did not do that. You could teach everything else, come over with money or not. But if you're not teaching, like, to be cultural aware of how the United States works and what we expect, I absolutely could see where he would just do a lot of stupid things that wouldn't make sense. So, what do you guys think of the jury's decision to spare his life? Because that ended up surprising a lot of observers who just assumed that the 9/11 death toll of 3,000 human lives stolen from them would lead to a unanimous death sentence. And one juror was persuaded by mitigating factors, so that one juror stopped the death penalty. So, do you agree with the life verdict in this case? And what does it say about the American justice system that even a 9/11 conspirator did not receive the death penalty?
So to keep him alive is actually making him suffer even more. So in my opinion, this is actually a good thing, not a bad thing. Because remember, he was willing to die. So death to him is nothing. Staying alive and think about what he did and suffer and not being able to get out and not being able to socialize or see his family, any of that, and probably not being treated very nice, it's worse than just being deaf and get it over with. That's just my opinion.
I think that in this situation, there was and there may still be value in keeping him alive. Because based on the way he reacted when he got convicted, he didn't even feel bad. So I doubt he was giving them all of the intel that they would have wanted. So by keeping him alive, you always leave the opportunity open in the future to learn more information about the attack. So I think in this case, yes, it made sense. And I think based on Moussaoui's behavior in the aftermath and the motions he's tried to file to retract his guilty plea, I think that for him, being stuck in that supermax prison probably is worse than death.
So, but in 2015, years after being sentenced, Moussaoui claimed that members of the Saudi royal family had funded Al Qaeda and the 9/11 plot, a statement he later reiterated in a deposition. So, given Moussaoui's history of false statements, his erratic behavior, how credible, if any, do you think his allegations should be given? And how should investigators and the public approach such claims from a convicted terrorist?
So yeah, I would not take his word seriously. He's obviously not credible. I think that in the context of maybe a government organization interviewing him, I think there's value in that and there could be some credibility, but you would need to have a lot of contextual information from with inside an agency to be able to substantiate or verify any claims that he's making. So as far as public facing statements like this, no, I don't think he has any credibility. And honestly, not just that he's a liar, but I would go even further to say that he's unstable because I think anyone that would even participate in the plot he participated in has to be a little nuts to begin with. So I would question his mental status as well.
Yeah, being radicalized, I feel that he was definitely unstable. I wanted to ask about some of the changes that we have seen after 9/11.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people bring up the Patriot Act when it comes to 9/11. That drastically expanded the government's ability to get information from American citizens and from non American citizens that are within the United States borders. A lot of people criticize that as overreach. But at the same time, that did enable a lot of these agencies to collect some of the information and fill some of the gaps that could have prevented 9/11. So I think the Patriot Act is a hot topic that a lot of people bring up. I don't really know how I feel about it, to be honest.
Definitely. The USA Patriot Act was the law passed in 2001 that significantly expanded the U.S. government's surveillance powers and the investigative tools to combat terrorism, but it also raised significant civil liberties and privacy concerns. And key provisions allowed for expanded wiretapping, sneak and peek searches, broader sharing of information between agencies, and to me, I don't know why this one is so important, the enhanced measures against money laundering. And many of its provisions have since expired or modified by subsequent legislation. So I encourage our listeners, if you're interested, definitely look at the USA Patriot Act. But let's do this. Let's go back and forth to what you remember after. First of all, just being afraid to fly, right? Like that was, I think, the first thing that we all had to kind of like swallow and say, okay, let's get back. So there was no flying for, I think, a couple days. You just couldn't look at anything without hearing names and hearing stories and learning what was going on. The pictures, more video was coming out at the time. And so people were absolutely on edge.
Yeah, absolutely. Like for me, I used to go out of the country and stay out of the country for about a month. And flying internationally was very hard after 9/11. I remember I used to travel bringing my almond butter and just a bunch of things that I love to carry with me because there are things that are they were not found anywhere else. So I remember some things taking out of my suitcase and literally being left at the airport because it was not allowed. And even a comb, if you had a comb, they had it. There was like they looked like a weapon. They would take it from you. There were so many regulations. It was like very hard to pack sometimes. It's like, what am I taking in my hands? What am I taking in my suitcase? The shoes, remember how we had to take our shoes off and all of these things. It was very hard to travel during that time. And it's scary at the same time. I felt like every time I was on the plane and I see anybody that was like suspicious. I was very like paying attention. So it really took a little bit of joy from people during that time. think we were trying to go with the flow and survive. And thankfully, we're still here. So I really feel, especially today, for those who lost their lives and those who suffer from the aftermath of the smoke and those who lost their life trying to save other people.
You're 100% right. I think also it allowed us to realize that we had to count on each other and also to recognize all the heroes that were running into a building when everyone's running out, our firefighters, our police departments. And I think it shined a bright light on those heroes. Regarding transportation and travel, can you believe this? It's so crazy, Joseph. Actually, the creation of the TSA was following 9/11. The Federal Transportation Security Administration was created to take over the airport security, and that replaced private airline contractors. There were increased screening, just like Mariana said, the shoes, the belts, the stricter rules on liquids, the full body scanners.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting when we look at some of the changes that have been made. It's like, shouldn't we maybe always have had a little bit more security on planes? Like a giant flying several ton object in the sky. It's like in retrospect, yeah, I think we should have probably had a lot tighter security and some more forethought about the security implications of people flying on an airplane and potentially hijacking it. So, it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback, but yeah, some of those changes probably, in my opinion, should have been made prior. It shouldn't have taken a terrorist attack for us to get serious about some of those security concerns.
You know what I remember? Right away, that was some people are talking about the federal air marshals. The number of armed federal air marshals was really expanded, and didn't know who would be that federal air marshal because they were undercover. I thought that was the most interesting job that there could be. Also, change from that, Joseph, is that we began to have programs like TSA PreCheck and Global Entry, and they were introduced to streamline the process for vetted travelers and getting personal data and fingerprints beforehand. And in 2005 was the Real ID Act. Is that not crazy, you guys? Real ID Act 2005 finally took place. It took 20 years for the Real ID Act to take place. I think it's important that we just, at the end of the day, we stay aware. The big thing is just be aware. We really need to stop looking at our phones sometimes and really just take a look around us. That's really important. We just never know what's going to happen. And I think that these are lessons that we learn. And Joseph, you're right. Like, really, like, we have to learn these lessons. How many more do we have to learn in our lifetime and in our future children's lifetime? But anyways, Joseph, I'm glad you thought to bring up the case of Zacarias Moussaoui. I learned a lot tonight and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. It just so happened that our Thursday episode that we do every Tuesday and Thursday fell on 9/11, and I just thought it would have been weird to have a show and not do it on probably one of the worst true crimes in American history. So that's why I chose to do it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. That is a wrap for Debate the News True Crime. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth look into the Zacarias Moussaoui case. We know this was an especially heavy and complex story involving international terrorism, intelligence failures, and the quest for justice after an unprecedented national tragedy. But cases like this are crucial to examine in full. Understanding what went wrong and what went right can help inform how we handle threats in the future.
If you enjoyed this episode or learned something new like I did, please subscribe to Debate the News True Crime. That will help to get us seen by more eyes and ears. Okay. And by the way, we're on every podcast platform. Please consider leaving us a review. We'd love to have your feedback. We're live here on Chatter Social. Come on in. Thank you to the Debate the News team, headed up by Jonathan Bing. We appreciate your trust in us. And for our guests that are here, your support helps others find the show, keeps us on the air, bringing you these important discussions.
And as always, we appreciate you listening and being a part of the conversation. We'll be back on Tuesday with another case and another deep dive into the facts.
Until next time, stay safe, stay curious. Thank you, and good night.